Hi everyone. This presentation is an exploration of some of the issues that arise from teaching large groups. We'll look at what is meant by a large group, the kinds of challenges teaching these groups can pose, and some ideas around how we can meet these challenges, and indeed capitalise on the positive elements of bringing people together to learn. So firstly, what is a large group? Well, there isn't a hard and fast definition, but many sources cite groups larger than 25 to 30 students. Personally, I find 25 a really good size, enough to collaborate, socialise and support each other, but not so many that the group becomes depersonalised. More than 40, and then I do find that my teaching style has to change. So maybe that's one of the defining factors. A group becomes large when you have to change what you do as a teacher. But what's considered large can also depend on the subject being taught and the circumstances, like the lab session pictured here. If the practical session is detailed, possibly potentially hazardous, and needs close supervision by the tutor, 20 students might be considered large, as it would require some changes to the way the session's usually taught. And what are some of the challenges of teaching large groups? Well, I think we'd all agree that this group qualifies as being large. If you look closely, you can see that it's a two-tier lecture theatre, which could probably hold more than 600 people. So how could we keep this many students interested and engaged in what we're teaching them? How do we tell if all the students are keeping up with us, who might be struggling and who might be bored? The larger the number of people in a group, the greater the diversity of learning styles and the abilities we're likely to encounter. So, how can we ensure that all students have an equal opportunity to learn? In a large group, responding to questions then and there can take up a lot of time. So do we take as many as we can and leave the rest? Might the size of the group dissuade some students from asking for fear of ridicule or just plain shyness? And outside the lecture, how can we manage the expectations of a large number of students? So let's take a look at some ideas that might help us to meet those challenges. Planning the session is vital when teaching large groups. Of course, it's vital in preparing to teach any group. But time pressures in large groups can build up quickly, and a minor disruption can turn into a major time sink very quickly. Large group teaching can particularly benefit from the use of learning technologies, especially when using flipped models. Flipping the classroom refers to giving the class learning materials online and, importantly, instructions on what to do with them and where they fit in the learning plan before the taught session to which they refer. This shifts the emphasis of the taught session towards explanation and discussion and away from knowledge transfer. Some tips on trying different ways of keeping students engaged in a large group include things like firstly, not lecturing for more than 20 minutes at a time and breaking the sessions up into smaller parts, each with a different activity. Or maybe giving students time to reflect on their learning, discussing a question in pairs or groups, for example. Or they can use props like a soft question ball that they throw around the class, and whoever has the ball answers the next question. Or maybe some activities that require some students to come to the front of the class to take part, the I need 5 volunteers approach. Whilst I wouldn't necessarily suggest dressing as Obi-Wan Kenobi, adding spontaneity to your lectures by letting your personality surface is much more interesting for your audience than the sage on the stage approach. Encouraging active learning in large groups is a real challenge, as the space restriction and the layout of the rooms that are often allotted to large groups can mitigate against it. I mentioned breaking the group into pairs or small groups earlier for discussion, but you could also incorporate voting systems like Mentimeter or audience response clicker systems like Turning Point. I mentioned using flipped classroom design earlier too, but why separate technology from the classroom session? Students come to classes with a range of communication and computing equipment, which you can encourage them to use. For example, you could set small groups a short literature search activity, asking them to find as many sources as they can in, say, 10 minutes, and then spend the next 10 minutes ranking them in order of academic relevance. For example, they might find web pages, books, journal articles, newspaper articles, and so on, and you would ask them to rank if we would give those sources equal weighting in academic writing. So I'd like to leave you with a couple of questions to think about. Taking account of the issues and ideas we've looked at in this presentation, does teaching a large group mean you become as much or more a performer than a teacher? And what impact might the characteristics of large group teaching have on your own teaching style? So please feel free to share your answers and thoughts in the Sharing Interesting Stuff discussion board in the unit on Brightspace, and thanks for watching.